Hey, Jonathan, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you here because you have experience with sales. You wrote a book, right? So you are the one to discuss something that a lot of recruiters struggle with. So the sales process and account management. And this is also something we were discussing with fellow members of the Tech Recruitment Academy, because a lot of them are solopreneurs, a lot of them are looking to get the first client, and they don't really know what to do, how to start. So I'm just so excited to discuss this with you.
Yeah, Michael, I'm thanks for having me on the show, one, and I'm looking forward to talking to your audience. I have a passion for the solo entrepreneur because I've always worked for myself, and so I've grown and sold a number of companies, but I always start with just me, figuring out how to sell it, how to reproduce it, how to grow it, how to build a team, how to put a process, and really the genesis of my book, The Sales Boss, is really how to build, manage, hire a sales team. But when you're the solo entrepreneur, you got to wear all those hats.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess all of these solopreneurs are probably most of them would like to get to a point when at some point they are managing a team, a recruiting agency with 10 key account managers and sales guys, but it's always about getting the first client and then a second and third. So why don't we kind of focus on the initial part of the sales cycle? And a lot of our um, members of the academy, they would like to focus on some niche within IT. So, for example, DevOps or cybersecurity. So, what would you say? Like, how could they or should they differentiate if they choose a niche and they would like to get a first client? Like, what should they do?
Well, maybe I back up just a bit from there. And I always like to talk about the entrepreneurial mindset. So, you've gotten into the business for a reason, right? Either you have a background in HR, you look at the recruiting space, whatever business that you're in, could be even something outside of recruiting, and you've decided you have an interest in it, you're talented, you have something of value to offer. But when you start a business, the number one thing is revenue, right? Like, how can I get my first client? How can I start putting money into the bank and build a real business around that? And what I find happens when people first sort of step their foot out on their own, and now they're going to be Michael Inc., right? Or Jonathan Inc. And they're finally, they put up their shingle. The challenge is that they oftentimes will sell to anyone because they just need a client. And they think, if I get my first one or two clients, then I'll be started and I can figure it out from there. And what I really recommend people to do is to back up and get really clear right from the beginning. What are they going to say no to? Right? Because if you are a recruiter, if you are an IT recruiter, you're still in a band of thousands and thousands of IT recruiters. And it's really difficult to stand out in that crowd. So, how do you niche down within a niche and maybe even a sub niche of a sub niche, right? So, you might go from IT recruiting, broadly speaking, and if you just said, I'm going to be an IT recruiter for cybersecurity companies, that's it. Now, that means you're going to get somebody asking you to do work in other niches, right? And it might be difficult to say no to that work. In fact, maybe on the download, you take some of that to feed the kids. But
Yeah.
but even inside it, if you niche down to cybersecurity, if you said, well, why don't I go one area deeper than that? Maybe there's a sub niche within cybersecurity. Maybe it's a particular one or two roles. And then what you have to do is just validate that the market size for that one or two roles or that cybersecurity is big enough to fund the sort of company that you want to have. And if the answer is yes, there's enough demand, then the question becomes, how do I build my demand around that? The reason that's so important is, as a solo entrepreneur, you only have so much time, you only have so many resources in terms of marketing and where you spend your focus. And so if you can become expert in speaking their sub language, right? If you know sort of the key hot topics and concerns when they hire somebody that's in cybersecurity as a developer, that might be different, right, than a developer or a front end, back end for some other sort of platform. And the more you can speak that language, the more you're going to be attracting the sort of decision maker whose job security relies on placing talented people in that role. Does that make sense?
Totally, totally. And I'm actually really guilty of this because I was also taking clients as they came our way. We got most of the clients from referrals, so they often just reach out and say, "Hey, Michael, could you help with a web developer role?" And then next week, "Could you help with a DevOps engineer?" And I was always like, "Hey, this is IT, so of course I do it." But it's still way too broad, so it doesn't allow us to build a list of just a small segment of candidates.
Yeah. And so there's sort of the dual edged sword. Everybody says, man, I'd love to have a referral only business,
Mm.
right? Because sales is hard and you got
Yeah.
to put effort in it and you have to make an investment in it. But as the founder, while you may take some of that business, your front appearance as a company and the language you learn has to be around getting to be an expert at that one thing. I'll give you an example. In one of the companies I own, which is a technology platform, it's called Who Hire, and it is around using AI prediction models to place people in roles. So it's sort of the digital version of recruiting. And our platform could be used for a lot of different companies, right? We have cybersecurity companies using our platform. We have tech companies using our platform. But if you went to our site, whohire.com, for that particular niche, it's all around home services, HVAC, plumbing, electrical, roofers. And the reason is I can speak to that audience. I can get on all the podcasts that serve those sort of buyers. I can go to those trade shows. I can put my front end messaging so when they land on my website, they're like, oh, this is a technology for construction, for home services.
Mm.
And it makes the effort of closing that business lower.
Mm. Very interesting. Very interesting.
Right. Now, that doesn't mean when a tech company comes on, my way by way of referral and they say, hey, can you do this for me? I say, sure, it's the same underlying technology and they still use it. They still get a lot of results. But I'm not going to shift my messaging and say, hey, we're the hiring platform for any company that needs to hire people.
Hmm. And that's kind of interesting, and comes back to you mentioning the goal, right? What the goal is the goal to kind of build a business that provides decent income, or would you like to build like international huge company with billions of revenues? Because if you would like to build a business with billions of revenues, billions of dollars of revenues, then probably, if you choose penetration cybersecurity specialist, it will not become the global business. But
Well, so there's some head trash for you.
it could.
You
Yeah.
could build a global business just around cybersecurity recruiting. It's a huge market and certainly more than any one person or one company could do. Right.
Mm,
So don't allow that desire for how big you get to decide your niche, because just like home services, it doesn't mean I'll play there forever. But for the
mhm,
next 2, 3 years, I can grow $1 billion company there and then add in, and then I can expand from there. But get your expertise, be known for when somebody says, I need personnel in the cybersecurity space, I'm going to call Michael.
mm.
You want it to
Awesome.
get that quick. Like I might give all my other IT jobs to some other recruiter, but when it comes to this, I have a preference
Mm.
for placing it because they know how to screen properly. They know what they're looking for. They know what's important to me.
Awesome. Awesome. I really like
Right.
this angle. It's just so cool because at the end, it's also about the mindset and how you approach things. So it totally
Do,
makes sense the way
do,
you
you,
do
do you ever do you ever eat at a restaurant? Here in the US, they have a restaurant called the Cheesecake Factory. And if you go
it.
into the Cheesecake Factory, their menu is like 20 pages and you can get everything from a steak to a hamburger to, vegan, like everything's on the menu. If you're going to go out with a group who all have different eating preferences, you might go to the Cheesecake Factory, right? Because there's something for everyone.
Yeah.
But the truth is, there's nothing excellent for anyone. You don't crave the Cheesecake Factory. Like if
Mm.
you want a really good steak, you go to a steakhouse. If you want a really good burger, you go to a burger place, right? If you want a really good beer, you go to a brewery. And that's how I think about business, especially if you're a solo entrepreneur. What is the thing that if they want that thing, they go to you, right? It's not, I just want to eat.
Yeah.
I want a steak. So it's not just I want to recruit, I want to find the best cybersecurity developer I can, or I need to find the best. And you can insert anything. I don't want to over index on cybersecurity, right? But the benefit of that is also I see entrepreneurs sort of get frozen in indecision. It's really hard to, I'm going to go do some prospecting. Maybe I don't have a big referral list yet, referral partners. So I log into LinkedIn and I'm like, well, I'll just message all of the IT developers or managers. And the truth is, they're getting thousands of messages, right? It's much easier to go, all right, I'm choosing cybersecurity. Who are the top 20 cybersecurity companies on the planet that have the kind of need that I have? Great. Now I have a very defined list. Who are the, what are the top 3 conferences that those people all attend? Great. Now I know where they hang out. What are the magazines that they read, the blog posts, the where do they educate themselves? And I can start getting this really defined list of where are the kinds of people that I want to bump into going to be. Now, if you say, well, typically it's a funded startup, maybe they've just received a Series A or a Series B funding, something like that. Now I can take my list of cybersecurity companies and I can go out into my databases that tell me who recently have received funding, and I can match that up to my list. And I might already have started developing those
Mm.
relationships before I even need to place somebody.
Awesome, awesome. Well, now when you say it, it just totally makes sense. I mean, like, why we are not doing it this way? It's just exactly like this. This is a kind of a no-brainer now, really. You know, the way you outline it, but it requires some thought process, which is
But
great. I mean, it's great, right? But what a lot of people do is exactly they just open LinkedIn Sales Navigator and they start messaging people with generic messages, which is probably why it doesn't work for them.
yeah, and you know what I would do if I was in that situation? As an example, you have an established business, so maybe less so for you. But if you decided, hey, I want to niche down to niche up, right, to get bigger, I would probably say, who are the kinds of industries and developers that I like talking to? Because you've got screening to do, you've got like, who do I enjoy having those conversations with? And who does my database largely represent in terms of who do I have access to in that community?
Mhm.
Right. And then pick based on that. If you're just starting out, I would probably look at where is the demand, but I would probably find an area that I'm actually interested in. So like I'm very interested in quantum computing. So I probably would pick the kinds of developers that would go into a quantum computing field. It's interesting, it's fascinating, and because of that, I don't mind attending their conferences even if I'm not getting business, right? Because when you first start attending a conference and you first start going to the networking events, you're not sell, sell, sell. You're developing relationships that pay off over time. Well, if I'm going to have to get on a plane or drive across town or log in and attend an online event, I'd rather be at an event that I find intellectually
Mm.
stimulating and curious outside of the thing that I'm there to do.
Yeah, yeah, that's so true. Like for me, it would be data engineering, data science, because that's what I used to do 10, 15 years ago. So makes
Yeah,
sense.
and because you have a passion for that
Mhm.
and you can sort of geek out on it. Now, when you think about candidates that are coming into your pipeline that you might be placing, isn't it true you're probably going to have better conversations with them? You'll sort of geek out together. They'll know you get them as a person and what they're looking for. That friction to place them If I'm a applicant and I can be placed by you or I can be placed by somebody else, like the market pay rates and all of that sort of iron themselves out, right?
Mm,
There's a rate. The
yeah.
the real difference is who do they want to work for? Like, would they rather you be placing them from job to job to job, or would they rather work with a generalist?
Mm. Interesting. Okay, okay. And then once the recruiter, solopreneur has clarity about the type of consultants and IT professionals to work with, what's next? They start joining events, they start building relationships. How do they go from someone who has never done any sales and suddenly needs to get a client on board? Like,
Ye
does it require some mindset shift, or what needs to be done?
So, I go back to everything should be a process, and a process has an outcome that I'm intending. So, it doesn't do me any good to just do the thing that I do and not understand why I'm doing it, because then I can't train somebody else, right? I need to know my own numbers. I need to be able to say, I make X number of contacts and I email X in order for one thing to fall out the other end. Because when I make my first handful of hires, I need to be able to have an understanding of what's their activity level need to be in
Hmm.
order to make a sale. So in my book, I use the acronym BOSS, BOSS, to represent the levers that you can pull to influence somebody's output or their results for sales. And the first one is behavior. Like, what is the thing they're going to do? It's not how do they do it. It's the thing. They attend an event, they do an email outreach, they do a mailer. What is the thing they do? That's behavior. And you have to know how much behavior is normal in order to get the outcome that you need, right?
Mm.
And the second thing is outlook, which is everything to do between somebody's head. How do they feel about themselves? How do they feel about their market, their competitor? It's everything happening up here. So if the behavior's right, the outlook's right, then we can talk about skill. How well do they do that thing, whatever that skill is? And you can train skills like, how do I have a good discovery call with an IT manager for the very first time and explain our services? How do I get those things done, right? That's a trainable skill. So I have to be able to, as a entrepreneur, define what's the minimum level of skill somebody needs to have to get started, and then what is expert look. And I'm getting thumbs up on my thing because I'm part of Zoom's discovery program. So this is one of their new features. And then the last thing is stature. And it becomes, so it's that order: behavior, outlook, skill set has to be in that order. When you've done enough of the right behaviors with the right outlook, with the right skill level, all of a sudden you have stature. You become the expert. People look to you first. So let's just go back to that example of doing, if you niche down to cybersecurity, think of all of the art. Like if you sit down to write an article on LinkedIn or you put out a piece of content, it becomes really easy to write that from the what are the 5 missteps to avoid when hiring a cybersecurity developer.
Mhm.
And I could speak right to it from experience,
Mm.
right? Which is much different than a broad article saying, "How do you do IT recruiting?"
Mm.
Right? So the challenge is, though, even after you have that developed, you have one problem, and I call it the time problem. If you just go out and attend conferences and do, what I consider casual warming up, it's sort of like turning the stove on, right? And you turn it on low, like eventually that water is going to get hot, but it's going to take a while and you might starve in the meantime if you're trying to cook some noodles, right? A lot of times people are under time pressure. They're like, hey, I quit my job. I've got a certain amount of money in the bank. I need to have clients. I got to eat. They got to turn it up. So that's where you have to be able to do proactive outreach. There's nothing like, obviously, eventually you want an incoming stream of requests. But until that incoming streams comes in, you have to do outbound. So what I would do is I would sit down, just a blank sheet of paper, maybe a blank computer screen, however you like to do things. I'm very tactile, so I still write. And I would say, what are the top 15 ways that IT recruiters get jobs today? So on one, they're doing automations on LinkedIn for mass outreach.
Hmm.
Number two, they're just list them down. And then I would take my pencil and I would scratch every one of them out and I would forbid myself to do that thing,
All of them.
all of them. And then I would ask myself, what's left? What can I do differently? The reason is if I send out 1,000 automations on LinkedIn saying, "Do you want to hire a recruiter?" I'm going to be maybe I get one out of 1,000. And I'm also putting myself in that sort of pest right
Hmm.
with everyone else, right? I've already when somebody works with you, there's this idea of being a trusted advisor. If you think about the levels of sales, at the very bottom, you sort of have a peddler.
Hmm.
Like think about a street vendor. If you go to a beach community, right, and they come by and they're like, "Hey, can I braid your hair? Or do you want to buy a popsicle?" Like that's the peddler, right?
Totally. Yeah.
And maybe if you're in the mood, you buy, but it's not really a sustainable business. The next level up is a vendor. And if you're in a vendor relationship, they literally put you on a spreadsheet and they say vendor A will do it for this under this
Hmm.
timeline, this quality level, and they pick what's important to them: quality, time, price. They compare you against the other and they go, "Oh, we're going to go with Michael
Hmm.
to vend this job this time," right? Peddler, vendor. Then you have the next level up is salesperson. And the only difference between a vendor and a salesperson is there's a person involved. Like a vendor, you could just buy online, but sometimes the buying process requires a person. It doesn't have to be talented. Sometimes the salesperson gets in the way of closing the deal. The next level up is a consultant, and a consultant adds value to the buying process. They're causing their customer to think and act differently, and their purchasing decisions differently. And then I would go one step above that, which is the trusted advisor. And
Hmm.
a trusted advisor is somebody that looks to you for advice and guidance, even outside of your area of expertise.
That's
They
powerful.
they think of you first. So if you said in your mind, "Hey, I have a financial problem," there's probably somebody in your mind that's a trusted advisor. It's the person you call for anything related to finances, right? Might be the same thing in health. There's somebody that you have as a health trusted advisor. So I'd be asking myself the question, how do I position myself as the trusted advisor? The problem is if I'm a trusted advisor and I'm walking the beach asking somebody if they want their hair braided,
Hmm.
like you can never see that peddler vendor as a trusted advisor. They don't go together.
Yeah.
Make
That's
sense?
that's totally makes sense. Yeah, totally.
So that's why I want to scratch off the list the thing that everybody's doing that would put them in that category. And I only want to start I want to draw a line above salesperson. I only want to be in that consultant trusted advisor. I'm not going to get to trusted advisor with everyone, might just be, but I'm going to play in that space. So what do trusted advisors do? They run podcasts. You're running a podcast. You're automatically casting yourself as that way. You're training other people. That puts you in a trusted advisor category, right? Make
Yeah.
sense? So I'm writing articles. I'm do so that if you're starting a business, yes, you're hungry. Yes, you got to close deals, but that doesn't mean you're walking the beach selling three for a dollar, right?
That's
Because as soon as you have success in that space, that's all you're ever going to do because you will get addicted to that easy revenue that's not very profitable. And if you want to move upstream, you actually should just start upstream. It's way easier to start here than down here.
that's very powerful. That's very
It, it
powerful.
it
Now,
it just it just takes a little time. So let's go back to and I know I'm ranting. I hope that's okay.
no. I really like love this part. Like that's super cool.
The on one end you have it's going to take me time, right? I put out articles, I do shows. It's not like tomorrow the
Mhm.
faucet turns on.
Yeah.
So I've written a list of things I can't do. What can I do? So I'll give you an example. I was trying to grow a business and I was doing leadership development classes, and there's thousands and thousands of leadership gurus out there that can sell training to you. So what did I do? Well, I decided I was going to send out five. First, I researched my market. I knew who the top 30 companies I wanted to go after. I actually did 100, and then I divided it: that my top 30, my middle 30, my bottom 40,
Mm.
and I did physical mailers. So I decided I'm going to mail five things. I'm going to wrap them all in brown wrapping paper, and they're going to be tied with a physical string, and they're going to have a wax seal stamp on them.
Wow.
And they're all going to be different. But the first one's going to be a wooden puzzle, and it's going to have $100 bill in it. See the $100 bill, but they can't get it out. And I'm going to put a letter in there saying, being able to get the best results out of your leadership team without breaking them is probably like trying to get this $100 bill out of this puzzle without breaking it. If you'll take 10 minutes with me, I'll show you how to do both. I'm not going to get a call back on that, right? But I mail it. A week later, they get something else. It's a can of WD-40. There's a little thing tied into it. But by the time I actually call them, I'm like, "Oh, I'm the guy that keeps sending you the stuff in the brown paper packages tied up with string," which ties into sort of a popular
Mhm.
song, right? And they laugh. I'm already different. They don't see me as I've already invested significantly. I have control of that from the time I do the first mailing to the time I'm on the phone with them as a month, and I know I'm gonna get that phone call, and I know I'm gonna close at a higher rate. That's totally different than saying, "Let me just put 1,000 things out on LinkedIn." They have to take my call. Does that make sense? I was in another situation where I needed to get, a hold of the hospital administrator, the CEO of the hospital. It's really tough to get a hold of a CEO of a hospital at any time. And in the particular market here in the US I was working in, there was a new law that hospitals would get reimbursed based on a quality score. And the government would publish their quality score. So you knew who was in first place as the hospital, who was second place, third place, whatever. So I wanted the second place person. That's who I was going to help. So how are you going to get a hold of that person and get your message across? You could spend a lot of time. You just spend time thinking, how can I be different? How can I be unique? What I ended up doing was getting a 4x8, like a sheet of plywood, massive board. And I put the picture of the CEO on one side of the first place hospital, their competitor, and second place, number two, right under their name with the big letters. How long will you be satisfied being in second place? And my message on the other side, and I wrapped it and I had it hand delivered into their office. So it would go into their office. It looked like a gift. They would unwrap it. And here was this controversial calling them out for being in second place. Well, they couldn't stick it in the trash can. There was no easy way to get it out. Like, I have made a memory for them. And by the way, I didn't include any way for them to contact me because a salesperson leaves a way to contact, right?
Mhm.
So I scratched that off my list. But then I can call and I can talk to the gatekeeper, the secretary, and I can say, "Susan, I'm the guy that sent that big 4x8. How long are you going to be in second place?" And she's going to laugh. She's go, "Oh man, you really pissed him off." And I'll be like, "Well, do you think I pissed him off enough that he'll take my call?" Right? So I closed a lot of hospitals, and I could have spent a lot of time and a lot of salespeople effort in trying to get through that. And so I just reinforce to people: if you're the solo entrepreneur, niche down, get your targets, and then figure out how am I going to be different to accelerate that time. Like, keep the pot on the stove on low, right? Still go to your events, develop your network. Eventually that's going to start flowing. But in the meantime, don't market to 1,000 mindless, faceless people. Just
Mm.
take a list, get it down to 100 if you can manage 100. If you can't afford 100 and do it over the top, I'd rather you spend on 10 people and go over the top
Mm. Mm.
because you only need one or two of them. And now you have some revenue that you can invest, and I'm gonna charge high enough that I can grow, right?
Mm. Mm. Wow, wow, that's just so powerful. I'm almost speechless, but I try to visualize what does this look like in practice when, let's say, we apply it in the cybersecurity space, let's say, right? So let's say there is an agency that specializes in cybersecurity. They need to get clients that hire cybersecurity specialists, right? So we can do some research. We find top 10 companies, let's say, in some region, and then we can see on LinkedIn that they are looking for the cybersecurity specialist. So, what would you advise? Now we have a few options, for example, to reach out to the head of HR or reach out to the recruiter. Maybe there is some internal talent acquisition specialist, or reach out to the director of IT, CTO, or reach out to CEO. Like, what would be your strategy? I, kind of already
I
see.
yeah, I don't know the industry well enough to give you a blanket answer to that question, and I would always say it depends. It depends on who makes the decision
Mhm.
in that organization. That's where I'm gonna spend a little bit of time and research. I'm gonna really understand what the playing field is.
Yeah, yeah. But just as I was asking the question, I kind of visualized the list as you were saying and scratch the item, reach out to the recruiter because that's the obvious one. Reach out to the head of HR, that's the obvious one. So I would scratch it as well. And
Well, the person you're reaching out to might be obvious, and it might be the right person for a reason.
mhm.
It's how you reach out to them.
Oh, I see. I see. Okay.
Like, if they're the one that makes the decision, you for sure start with them.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah, they should be your best friend. Like, I wanna know who actually when they say yes, then you get to be on their list. You get to work with them.
Hmm.
And
And
where do they hang out? What do they read? What do they look at? What do they find amusing?
mhm. And now when we have this clarity about the target person, it's probably easier to really connect with them and build a relationship because what a lot of recruiters and solopreneurs within this space do, they just send the mass messages on LinkedIn and mass emails, but that way you would not build a relationship, right?
And nobody wants to read it.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like, it's nobody wants to read it. It's just becoming background noise.
Yeah, yeah. It gives,
So,
it gives you the false impression of some work and some progress because you send hundreds of messages every day, but then at the end, there may not be any outcome.
yeah, and it's not very satisfying,
Mm, true.
right? Like, bringing your creativity to it, at least it's satisfying, even if you don't get any business. Well, I know we're running up against the time we committed, but,
Yeah,
uh, I've certainly enjoyed our conversation.
yeah, so cool. Yeah, thanks a lot for all your insights. And before we wrap it up, is there any final advice you would have to the solopreneurs who are trying to make it in the IT recruiting space?
Wow, that's a wide open question. I'm gonna just go with the solo entrepreneur.
Hmm.
Always bet on yourself.
That's a good one.
Always bet on yourself. What happens if you're in the solo entrepreneur is it gets hard, and then you think about going back to what you left. And you're probably going to go back to what you left right at the moment it would have paid off and given you the life that you wanted to have.
Awesome. Well, that's powerful. Well, thanks a lot for all your insights. I need to redo our business development strategy because so far we relied on the referrals, and that's
Perfect.
not sustainable.
Well, let's schedule episode 2 after Michael has done his rework. How about that?
That sounds like a plan. Let's do it.
Look forward to chatting to you then.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day. See you soon again.
Bye-bye.
Bye.